From humble beginnings and broken dreams to unimaginable success and the price that comes with it. This is the story of a person who battled through pain, rejection, and the weight of fame to finally discover that true peace comes not from the applause, but from within. This journey is not about fame, it's about the strength to rise again, to rebuild, and to leave a legacy that matters. Before the lights and the fame, there was a small town, a broken family, and a boy whose name no one knew. This is where it all began. He grew up in a place where everybody knew each other, where houses were small and money was always tight. People worked hard just to get through the day. Life was simple, but it was also heavy, especially for a young boy who came into the world already carrying questions he didn't know how to ask. His mother raised him on her own, doing her best to keep food on the table. She worked long hours, sometimes leaving early in the morning and coming home late at night. He understood even as a child that she was tired, but she never complained. She wanted him to feel safe, even when she couldn't give him everything she wished she could. His father was not around. In fact, he didn't even know the man's face for many years. Growing up without a father left a hole inside him that he didn't know how to fill. When he saw other kids with their dads at school events or playing outside, he felt something tighten inside his chest. He wondered why his own father didn't want him. He wondered if he had done something wrong, even though he was far too young to carry such thoughts. The absence shaped him in ways he didn't fully understand. It gave him a quiet sadness, but also a longing for something better than what he had. The people in town knew his situation. Some felt sorry for his mother, some whispered behind her back, and others pretended not to notice. Small towns can be kind, but they can also be harsh. Growing up in that environment taught him early how to stay strong and how to ignore the looks that made him feel different. His mother always told him that he was enough, that he didn't need anyone else's approval. She did her best to protect him from the judgment around them, but he still felt it. Kids at school sometimes made hurtful comments, and even when they didn't, he always sensed he was not like everyone else. Despite all the challenges, these early experiences shaped his character. They taught him resilience, patience, and a deep desire to make something meaningful out of his life. He learned to appreciate small things: a warm meal after a long day, a kind word from a neighbor, a small success at school. These little moments helped him build confidence slowly, even if the world around him tried to shake it. He carried memories of struggle from a young age. He remembered watching his mother count coins to pay bills. He remembered wearing hand-me-down clothes and pretending not to care when the other kids. He remembered nights when the electricity went out or when dinner was just whatever was left in the fridge. But he also remembered how he learned to distract himself from these hardships. Sometimes he read old books from the school library. Sometimes he spent time outside to stay away from the noise of grown-up problems. And sometimes he just tried to imagine a better future, even if he didn't know what it looked like yet. There were a few people in his early life who made small but important differences. A teacher who told him he was smart when he felt useless. A neighbor who let him help with odd jobs and paid him a little money. A community leader who encouraged him to stick with school. These small moments mattered. They didn't fix his life, but they gave him strength. They made him believe that good people existed, and that life did not have to stay the same forever. As he grew older, something inside him began to spark. He discovered something he loved, something that made him forget his worries. For some kids, it might be sports. For others, music. For others, writing. drawing, or even just working with their hands. For him, it became the one thing that made him feel confident. It didn't matter if his home was small or if his father wasn't there. When he practiced this passion, he felt whole. It became the place where he could breathe, a place where he felt in control. This passion slowly grew stronger. He practiced whenever he could. If it was sports, he played until the sun went down. If it was music, he learned how to make simple sounds turn into something beautiful. If it was something else, he put all his time and effort into getting better. And even though he had no special equipment, no fancy tools, and no expensive lessons, he didn't let that stop him. He used whatever he had, and his dedication became his biggest strength. The first moment of recognition came early. Maybe it was a school event, a small competition, or a simple compliment from someone who noticed his talent. Whatever it was, it mattered deeply. It was the first time he felt seen. The first time someone looked at him and didn't see a child from a broken home or a boy without a father. They saw potential. They saw skill. They saw someone who could become more. That small recognition stayed with him. It made him believe that his dreams, no matter how big, were not foolish. It made him work harder. It became the quiet reminder he carried through every difficult moment that followed. His childhood shaped him, but his passion lifted him. It gave him a reason to hope, a reason to keep going, and a reason to imagine a life beyond the limits of his small town. But that first glimpse of hope was fleeting, and it would take much more than talent or dreams to overcome the darkness that awaited just around the corner. The world was opening up, and so were the doors of opportunity, until one crushing moment tore it all down. As he grew older, the passion he discovered in childhood slowly became the center of his life. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was the one thing that made him feel strong, confident, and connected to something bigger than himself. Whether it was sports, music, or another talent, he threw himself into it with everything he had. He practiced every day, sometimes early in the morning before school, and sometimes late at night when the rest of the house was quiet. It became the place where he felt safe, the place where nothing from his difficult childhood could reach him. He remembered the first time he truly felt the joy of seeing his hard work turn into something real. If it was sports, maybe it was the moment he made the team, holding the uniform with pride. If it was music, maybe it was the first time he played a full song without stopping, or the first time someone told him he had a gift. No matter what the passion was, that early moment stayed with him for years. It made him believe that life didn't always have to be a struggle. He could rise above his circumstances. He could be someone. Along the way, there were people who helped shape his talent. A coach who saw potential in him even when he doubted himself. A teacher who encouraged him to keep practicing. A neighbor who listened, guided, or supported him in small ways. These figures weren't always close to him, but their encouragement mattered. It helped him believe in himself, even when life made him question everything. Their words came back to him during moments of self-doubt, reminding him that he was capable of more than he realized. With time, his skill grew stronger. He started performing better, achieving things he once only dreamed about. Maybe he won his first game, wrote his first full song, performed in front of a small audience, or showed his ability in a way that impressed people around him. Slowly, things began to fall into place. For the first time in his life, he tasted the feeling of genuine success. He started noticing him. Friends cheered for him. Teachers praised him. His mother felt proud, and even though she said little, He could see the light in her eyes. This period of progress felt like a new beginning. He could see a future forming ahead of him, one where he wasn't just the boy from a broken home, but someone who had real talent, someone who had a chance to do something meaningful. His heart filled with hope, and he started believing that maybe, just maybe, he was stepping into the life he had always wanted. But life often tests people in ways they don't expect. Just when everything seemed to be going right, disaster hit. It could have been an injury that came suddenly, ruining an important season or ending his chance to play. If his passion was music, maybe his voice gave out, or he faced a painful rejection after pouring his heart into a performance. It might have been a betrayal from someone he trusted. Whatever it was, it struck fast and changed everything. The moment it happened, he felt his world collapse. The future he had been building disappeared in seconds. He remembered the exact feeling, the shock in his chest, the disappointment spreading through him, the confusion that followed. It didn't feel fair. After everything he had already survived, after all the effort he put in, losing the one thing that gave him purpose felt unbearable. He tried to stay strong. He tried to tell himself he could get through it the same way he got through other challenges. At first, he pushed forward, hoping the setback would heal quickly or the problem would fix itself. He kept practicing or showing up, even when the pain, physical or emotional, only got worse. But the weight of the disappointment slowly began to break him down. That's when the inner conflict took over. He started questioning everything about himself. Was he really talented, or had it all been a mistake? Had the early success only fooled him into believing he was capable? He wondered if he even had a future anymore. The passion he once loved became a painful reminder of what he might never achieve again. Each day grew heavier. Each thought felt darker. He began to lose the confidence he had built so slowly and painfully. This period of emotional struggle became one of the hardest chapters of his life. He felt lost, unsure of who he was, without the thing that had defined him for years. Nights became longer. Days felt empty. The dreams he once held tight now seemed far away, almost impossible to reach. He found himself thinking about giving up. The voice in his head repeated doubts he couldn't silence. He wondered if he should accept that life wasn't meant to give him anything more than what he had already endured. But deep inside, there was still a small part of him that refused to disappear. That part kept asking him to hold on, even if he didn't know how long he could last. This internal struggle, painful as it was, began to shape him. It started teaching him the different kind of strength. A strength born not from success, but from surviving disappointment. The emotional lows slowly began to carve a stronger foundation in him. The hardship made him more patient. The sadness made him more determined. And the confusion pushed him to think deeper about who he wanted to become. He didn't know it at the time, but this struggle was planting the seeds of perseverance that would guide him for the rest of his life. Every moment of doubt was shaping him. Every tear, every frustration, every fear was building a new kind of resilience inside him. Still, during that dark period, he felt like he had reached the limit of what he could bear. He believed he had already lost everything that mattered. And just as they thought they had nothing left to lose, fate threw one last blow, one that would change everything forever. From darkness, the faintest light shone, though it would take everything they had to reach it. The years following his biggest setback were the hardest of his life. With no support, no connections, and no clear path forward, he found himself in a constant battle for survival. He worked multiple jobs just to scrape by, doing anything he could to make ends meet. Each day felt like a test of endurance, and the nights were even harder. He would often stay up late, reflecting on his struggles, wondering if it was all worth it. Every rejection from venues, every door slammed in his face, felt like another weight added to his already heavy heart. During this time, loneliness was his constant companion. There were few people to turn to, and the ones who had supported him seemed to disappear as the years wore on. He would sometimes find himself on stage at small, empty clubs, performing for a handful of people who barely seemed to notice. The constant isolation took a toll on his spirit. Doubts crept in again, and the harsh reality of rejection made it feel impossible to keep pushing forward. He questioned whether he would ever find the success he once dreamed of. There were nights when he thought about giving up entirely, when it felt like there was no room left for hope. But even in his darkest hours, there was still a spark within him that refused to go out. He clung to that small glimmer of hope, even when it seemed foolish. He continued performing, even if the crowds were small or indifferent. He spent countless hours honing his craft, practicing his music, and pushing himself to be better, even when no one was watching. It wasn't easy, but slowly, something started to shift. He didn't know it at the time, but the small steps he was taking were bringing him closer to the breakthrough he so desperately needed. And then, one day, that breakthrough came. It wasn't grand or planned, it was a lucky moment, a connection he never saw coming. A music producer who had heard about him through a mutual acquaintance showed up at one of his small gigs. The producer was impressed, and before he knew it, the character found himself in front of an opportunity that could change everything. A contract offer followed soon after, one that would open the doors to a wider world. It was the first real recognition he had ever received. For the first time in years, someone saw him not just as a struggling artist, but as someone with true potential. The emotional highs of that moment were overwhelming. It felt like everything he had worked for was finally coming to fruition. The contract wasn't just a piece of paper. It was validation. It was proof that he was good enough, that all those years of sacrifice and hardship weren't in vain. His heart filled with pride, but also with a deep sense of relief. He had never wanted to quit, but the struggle had made him question if he could ever find success. Now, with this breakthrough, he felt a new kind of strength. He knew he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was finally stepping into his future. With this new opportunity, his life began to change in ways he had only dreamed of. His first taste of fame was everything he had imagined. The recognition was overwhelming at first. The clubs that had once ignored him were now filled with eager fans, and his music was getting airtime on the radio. He had people approaching him, offering him deals, and telling him he was the next big thing. For the first time in his life, he felt like he mattered. The world that once seemed so distant and unkind had finally started to open up to him. But as the fame grew, so did the pressure. With every new step forward, the world around him seemed to shift. The attention was flattering, but it was also overwhelming. He had to balance his growing success with the person he still was, the one who had grown up in small towns and fought for every inch of his place in the world. The pressure to be more, to live up to the expectations of others, was like a weight on his shoulders. He had to remind himself that he was still the same person, no matter how many records he sold or how many fans cheered his name. The toll it took on his relationships was one of the hardest things to bear. Family members, friends, and even old acquaintances started to see him differently. The The person who had once been just like them was now distant, a person caught up in the whirlwind of fame. Some people found it hard to adjust to his new life, and they treated him like someone else entirely. The distance between him and the people who once knew him best began to grow. It was hard to navigate these changes, especially when he still needed those relationships to ground him. Fame had a way of turning people into something they didn't recognize, and that became one of his hardest struggles, keeping his true self intact while the world watched him change. Just as they began to feel like they might finally have control, everything they worked for teetered on the edge of disaster. At the top of the mountain, the view is beautiful, but it comes with a price they never saw coming. As the character's fame grew, so did the tension between the image they projected to the world and the pain they carried quietly behind the scenes. The demands of constant touring, interviews, and appearances took a toll that no one could see. On stage, they were the embodiment of success, but offstage, the cracks were starting to show. The stress of being constantly in the public eye, the pressure to keep producing new material, and the weight of expectations began to wear them down in ways they never anticipated. What once felt like a dream come true slowly started to feel like a cage. They had worked so hard to get to this point, but the rewards came with sacrifices they had never imagined. The physical toll was the most immediate. Their body, which had once carried them through long hours of practice and performance, now ached constantly. They were always exhausted, but it wasn't just the tiredness of a long workday. It was the kind of exhaustion that comes from constantly being on, always in the public eye, always expected to smile, to perform, to be perfect. Their health started to suffer. Sleepless nights became routine, and so did the late nights spent on planes, in hotels, and on stages. The pressure of meeting deadlines, appearing in the media, and staying relevant in a fast-moving industry drained them mentally and physically. But the hardest part was the emotional toll it took. Success, they realized, wasn't as fulfilling as they thought it would be. There were moments when they stood on stage with thousands of people cheering and still felt empty inside. That emptiness began to gnaw at them, leaving them questioning the purpose of it all. They had sacrificed so much to get where they were, time with family, friends, and themselves. But the success didn't fill the void. The applause, the fame, the accolades, they were all just a distraction from the loneliness they felt when the lights went out and the cameras stopped rolling. The world saw them as someone who had everything, but in reality, they felt as if they had lost themselves in the process. It was hard to admit, but the things they had worked so hard for weren't bringing the happiness they had imagined. The strain on their personal life was even harder to bear. Relationships with partners, family, and old friends began to crack under the pressure. The constant travel and the ever-growing list of commitments left little room for connection. They tried to keep in touch, to make time for loved ones, but it was never enough. Phone calls turned into brief texts, and moments that should have been shared became fleeting. Their partner, once a source of support, now felt like a stranger. The emotional distance between them grew as the character became more consumed by their career. What started as a strong, loving relationship slowly shifted into something distant and strained. Arguments became more frequent, and the frustration of not being able to connect weighed heavily on both of them. And then came the betrayal, a moment that shattered their sense of security. A close friend, someone they had trusted, turned their back on them at the moment they needed support the most. The betrayal stung deeply, and it sent the character spiraling. The very people who were supposed to be there for them who should have helped them stay grounded, were the ones who abandoned them when the pressure got too much. It was a betrayal that cut to the core, and it made them question everything they had built. Was all the fame worth it if the people they cared about couldn't be there for them? Was it worth losing themselves and the people who mattered most just to stay at the top? The emotional toll continued to build until the character reached their breaking point. They were mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausted. The pressures of fame, the loneliness, the strained relationships, it all became too and much to handle. There was a key moment, a specific event that forced them to stop and reflect on their life. It could have been a public breakdown, a lost opportunity, or simply the realization that something had to change. The weight of it all became unbearable, and they were forced to ask themselves, is this really what I want? Was fame and success worth losing everything else that mattered? It was a crisis of identity, a moment when the character had to face the reality that they were at a crossroads. The life they had worked so hard to build was crumbling around them. They were not sure how much more they could take, and the future seemed uncertain. But in the wake of their crisis, they received the one thing they never expected: a second chance. The greatest strength is not in the rise, but in the fight to rise again. And now, they were ready to fight for what mattered most. After everything had fallen apart, after hitting rock bottom, the character finally found the courage to rebuild. The breakdown had left them broken, but in that brokenness, they discovered something crucial. True change starts from within. It wasn't about bouncing back to where they were before. It was about creating a new path, one that was more honest and fulfilling. They couldn't keep chasing fame and success at the cost of everything else. The things that truly mattered, family, health, personal peace, had to come first. The world could wait. This was the turning point. With the weight of their past mistakes and struggles behind them, they began to take slow, deliberate steps toward healing. The first step was reevaluating their priorities. They spent more time with family, with people who had always loved them, but had been pushed aside in the frenzy of their success. They focused on their own well-being, which had been neglected for so long. They started working out again, eating better, and getting the rest they had been missing for years. Most importantly, they reconnected with their true self. The person who had been hidden beneath the pressures of fame and the expectations of others. During this time, a support system began to form around them. Mentors, people who had seen the best and worst of their journey, stepped in to offer guidance. Their family, who had always been there, came forward with love and understanding. Even new relationships, people who had never been part of their world before, offered fresh perspectives. These new connections helped them see things differently, giving them the strength to move forward. It was a humbling experience, realizing that they didn't have to do everything on their own. They didn't have to carry the weight of the world by themselves anymore. These people, these relationships, gave them hope again. In the midst of rebuilding, they found a renewed sense of purpose. The spark that had once driven them had dimmed under the weight of fame, but now it started to flicker back to life. They remembered why they had started this journey in the first place: the love of the craft, the joy of creation, and the desire to make a meaningful impact. They no longer wanted to chase after success for the sake of recognition. Now, their focus shifted to what truly mattered: doing something that felt true to themselves, something that brought them fulfillment rather than just applause. They turned back to their roots, to the simple passion that had first pulled them into their craft. Whether it was music, art, or another form of expression, They reconnected with the reason they had started. It was never about the fame or the crowds, it was always about creating something real. And now, with a clear mind and renewed heart, they felt the urge to return to that basic, honest pursuit. They no longer cared about the commercial success that had once consumed them. What mattered now was authenticity. They wanted to create for themselves, for their own satisfaction, not for the approval of others. This new philosophy began to shape everything they did. No longer was every decision driven by market trends or popularity. They embraced creativity over commercial success. They took risks in their work, experimenting with new styles, themes, and ideas, unafraid to fail. They allowed themselves to be vulnerable, knowing that this would make their work more genuine. The character knew that they had nothing left to lose, and that freedom was the best gift they had received from their breakdown. Rebuilding relationships became another important part of their healing process. The emotional wounds from their past, particularly with their family, needed to be addressed. They reached out to loved ones they had neglected, apologizing for the distance they had created. They opened up about their struggles, about the pressure they had been under, and how that had affected their ability to connect. Slowly but surely, they began to restore trust and intimacy with the people they had once pushed away. It wasn't easy. There were still moments of tension and hurt, but the character made a genuine effort to repair what had been broken. This emotional healing mirrored their public recovery. Just as they were finding peace within themselves, they were learning to rebuild the bonds that mattered most. The work wasn't done yet. Rebuilding themselves and their relationships would take time, and they knew that. But for the first time in years, they felt hopeful. They had found something in themselves that had been missing for so long: strength, clarity, and a deep sense of purpose. They weren't the same person who had struggled with fame, exhaustion, and loneliness. They were someone new, someone who understood the importance of balance, love, and authenticity. With newfound strength, they were ready to face the world again, but this time, not as the person they once were. Something inside had shifted, but would the world be ready for the new them? Through pain and triumph, they had come full circle. Now it was time to leave a legacy that went beyond the stage. As the character moved forward, they realized that the next chapter of their life wasn't just about success or fame. It was about embracing the personal growth that had come through years of struggle, pain, and redemption. They had learned so much about who they were and what truly mattered. This was the moment to move into a new phase, one that was guided by maturity, clarity, and a deeper connection to their true self. The hunger for external validation was no longer the driving force. Now it was about finding fulfillment in their own journey, creating something lasting that wasn't measured by albums sold or tickets sold. The shift was not immediate, but gradual. With a clearer understanding of their purpose, they began to approach their work with a new mindset. Creativity became more about expressing what they felt inside, about telling stories that reflected their true self. The drive for success faded, replaced by a genuine desire to create work that had personal meaning. They sought projects that resonated with them on a deeper level, ones that connected to their experiences, their wisdom, and their own journey. The character felt a renewed passion for their craft, but this time it was about doing things that felt right, rather than things that would win praise or accolades. With this personal transformation came the realization that their legacy needed to be something more than just their work. Fame might have brought them recognition, but what they wanted to leave behind went far beyond that. They began to think about what kind of impact they wanted to have on the world and the people around them. It wasn't just about being remembered for their talent, but for the way they lived, for the lessons they could share, and for the difference they could make. They focused more on philanthropy, giving back to the communities that had supported them when they were just starting out. They donated their time and resources to causes that were close to their heart, whether it was helping at-risk youth, supporting music education, or raising awareness for mental health. Their own story became a tool to inspire others. They shared their journey openly, not just as a tale of success, but as a story of resilience. They spoke about the hard moments, the breakdowns, and the setbacks, hoping that by sharing their struggles, others would find the courage to keep going. This wasn't just about being a public figure anymore. It was about being someone who could truly make a difference. They used their platform to mentor younger artists or individuals who were facing the same kinds of challenges they had faced earlier in their career. They became a guide, offering advice and support to those who were still navigating their own battles. It wasn't about passing down technical skills, but about offering wisdom, encouragement, and the understanding that no matter how hard life gets, there's always a way forward. This phase in their life marked a turning point in what success meant. It was no longer about chasing fame or constantly striving for the next big win. The character found a new sense of success in their internal peace, their family, and their personal fulfillment. They had come to realize that these were the things that gave life real meaning. Their work was still important, but it was now more about creating from a place of truth and love rather than ambition. They learned to enjoy the simple moments, whether it was a quiet evening at home with loved ones or a peaceful walk through nature. The noise of the world didn't feel as loud anymore. Success was quieter, more intentional, and more reflective. In this new phase of life, they were no longer the same person who once sought validation from the outside world. Their journey had transformed them into someone who understood that true happiness came from within. I learned that success could be measured not just by what they achieved, but by how they lived, the relationships they nurtured, and the lives they touched. It wasn't about being the loudest in the room anymore. It was about making the most impact with the time and resources they had left. But as they reflected on their journey, a haunting question remained. Had they truly achieved everything they set out to? Or was there still one final, hidden challenge waiting to be faced? The final act was never about fame, but about becoming the person they always knew they could be, and finally finding peace in it. As they looked back on their journey, the character could see the full scope of their life laid out before them. The pain, the losses, the victories, every high and every low had shaped them into who they were now. It wasn't just about the fame, the awards, or the recognition they had achieved along the way. It was about everything they had endured, everything they had learned, and everything they had become in the process. The triumphs had been sweet, but it was the struggles, the setbacks, and the painful lessons that had truly defined them. The journey had been long and hard. There were moments of doubt, moments when it felt like they couldn't go on, but there were also moments of joy and victory when everything seemed to fall into place. Looking back now, the character realized that it wasn't the fame or success that had given their life meaning, it was the journey itself. The struggles had made them stronger. The losses had made them more compassionate. The victories had given them the courage to keep going, even when the road seemed impossible. There was a deep moment of introspection as they sat with these thoughts, reflecting on the person they had become. Had they truly become the person they wanted to be? It wasn't a question that could be answered easily, but as they looked at the life they had built, they knew the answer didn't matter as much as it used to. What mattered now was that they were at peace with themselves. They had embraced their past, understood their present, and had come to terms with who they were. The person they had hoped to become was never a perfect image of success or fame. Instead, it was someone who had learned to live with the scars, to accept the imperfections, and to appreciate the beauty in the journey, not just the destination. In this quiet reflection, there was a strong sense of gratitude and peace. They were thankful for everything that had shaped them, even the difficult moments. Those moments had given them wisdom, a deeper understanding of life, and a greater appreciation for the small things. They understood now that peace didn't come from external accomplishments or praise. It came from accepting oneself, flaws and all. The character had spent so many years chasing something outside themselves, but now they realized that everything they needed was within. The road to peace had been long, but it had been worth every step. With a sense of clarity and calm, the character delivered a message of hope and perseverance, not just to themselves, but to anyone who had ever felt lost or broken. They shared their story, not as a tale of glory, but as a testament to the power of resilience. Life was never easy, and growth was never simple, but the important thing was to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacles. Staying true to oneself was the most important thing, and the character hoped their journey would inspire others to find the strength to do the same. They didn't have all the answers, but they had learned that the key to living a meaningful life was to keep going, even when everything seemed to fall apart. As the character reflected on their legacy, there was a final emotional moment. They looked at their family, their career, and the life they had built. In this quiet moment, they realized the true beauty of their journey. It wasn't about the awards or the fame. It was about the love they had shared, the lessons they had learned, and the people they had touched. They had come full circle. The road had been hard, but it had led them to a place of peace, a place of understanding, and a place of love. They had achieved something far greater than they had ever imagined. An authentic life lived on their own terms. In their closing reflection, the character found themselves thinking about the influence they had had on others. They didn't know how far their story had reached or how many lives it had touched, but they knew it had been meaningful. They had lived through hardships, and in doing so, they had gained a deep understanding of what really mattered in life. The success and recognition had been important, but they were only pieces of a much larger picture. The true reward was in the relationships they had built, the impact they had made, and the peace they had found within themselves. They had learned that the valuable thing in life wasn't fame or wealth. It was the ability to love, to grow, and to be at peace with who you are. And with that realization, the character found contentment. They had lived, loved, and learned. They had faced challenges, overcome them, and emerged stronger for it. The journey had shaped them, and in the end, they were proud of the person they had become. The road may have been long, but it had been worth it. And now, as they looked back at everything they had achieved, they knew they had truly come full circle.